Hello, Janice.
Hello, Anthony.
Today we'll help answer the question, who owns a house during probate, or any real estate or co-op even? So when someone dies, many folks are confused about who owns the house or the property during the probate process, meaning that moment right after passing. To answer your question technically the heirs own it immediately upon death, subject, of course, to any debts and taxes of the estate. But who are the heirs, right? I mean, maybe that's not clear. So
Right.
The probate process can often be needed to decide who exactly those heirs are, and to put somebody in place, namely an executor, to figure out what are all those debts and taxes. So it's almost like yes, the heirs owned the property at the moment of death, but since you don't know who they are until later in time, it's just like they have to go back in time later to be owners as of the moment of death. It's like a
Right.
weird
It does.
paradox, yeah.
It's like you are, but you need to wait so we can go through everything to make sure you are. Yes.
But we don't know who you are.
Right.
And how
Right.
much you're inheriting, because there might be liens, debts, and taxes. So, okay,
Yes.
understandably a bit confusing. So we'll go over that, and we'll try to cover a few other common questions about who owns the property upon death. Okay? Or excuse me, during probate, but yes, upon death. Okay.
Yes.
So a question we get all the time is, can multiple heirs inherit a house? And this has to do with, multiple siblings or cousins. And it's very common that we see them inheriting as co-owners. So the answer is yes, multiple heirs can inherit either by will or directly on the deed. But this often leads to a lot of problems.
Oh, yes.
Goodness. The most common one is where one of these multiple family members lives in the property and won't leave. Or the heirs can't agree on how to manage that property, or if they should rent it out or sell it. Or if if one heir wants to keep, but everyone else wants to sell, they can't agree on a buyout price or procedure. Yeah?
And this happens more often than not. Way more often. Yeah.
So this very often leads to a probate sale, where even though in theory the will or the notion was that these heirs would inherit as co-owners of the property. Oh yes, this will keep them, make them closer and make them have bonds. No, it often leads to a probate sale just so people can take their shares and walk away from each other.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So then, how does that happen? How do you sell the property during probate? And the question is, I guess the question is an executor allowed to sell a house that's in probate? Do they have the ability to do that? Short answer is yes. A lot of folks are unsure if that executor has that authority. Yes, absolutely they do. And it's often necessary, as per either the will instructions that says sell this house and give the proceeds to my residuary from my heirs, or it might be necessary simply to cover the estate bills and taxes. Maybe the estate has a house and a couple bank accounts, but the bank accounts don't have nearly enough cash to cover all the expenses. Yeah.
Right.
And of course, as we just mentioned, it might be necessary because the heirs simply can't agree on what they want to do with that property, which again is super, super common.
Yes.
And lastly, do all the heirs have to agree to sell the probate house or real estate? Fair question, right? We talk about situations where one is living there or one can't agree on the buyout proceeding. So yes, of course, preferably, if everyone agrees, just life is so much easier for everyone involved, but not necessarily. So I know, right? If you're in probate, meaning you have a court-appointed executor, then the executor can make the theoretically impartial, especially if you have a professional executor and not a family member, or not one of the people who's a co-owner of the house.
Right. That are part of the yes.
I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. But if you have an impartial executor, it's easy. But yeah, in any case, the executor can make that decision. But if the executor is a family member, I mean, can you imagine the drama? Like, there's 4 siblings, and one of them is the one who gets to decide what happens.
Yeah, then that's just going to be one hot mess. Yeah, because if they're not agreeing anyway, and there's really, like you said, the impartial person that can come in and take care of it. Because otherwise, you're going to have a divide.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if it's not in probate, if you have multiple heirs or siblings or cousins, whatever, on the deed, then it's technically not part of probate. But if the heirs are in conflict in this situation, it's super expensive and complicated to sort of resolve that, because you will have expensive court proceedings, either to bring the property back into the probate estate so you can have an executor who is theoretically impartial to make all those decisions, or even worse, you have to do something that's called a judicial partition. Have you done one of those, Janice?
Oh, I have just a few, and it's very complex and very expensive.
They're brutal. And you're basically asking a judge to be the executor, not really, but to make all those important decisions regarding managing and selling the property.
Yes. And you know what? By the time you're done, I've seen that any profit that would have come out of it is just completely gone, just from all of the cost to go through that. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, we're kind of alluding that naming multiple heirs on a deed is not a good way to go. And just as a side note, that's a variant of what we call the beneficiary problem.
Yes.
Naming, using the deed to name your subsequent inheritors or heirs. Yeah, just it's another version of why beneficiary designations are bad. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. We get these questions a lot. A lot of folks call. My grandma passed away. Who owns the house right now, or things along those lines. So hopefully these help clear that up for our callers and listeners. And I think that covers it.
Absolutely. And thank you for your questions. We appreciate them, because that's where we're getting these from the listeners. I recommend Anthony's book, How Probate Works, available on Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you, Janice, as always. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for your questions. And we will talk soon next time. Take care.
Talk soon.